I'm going to talk about tests, and slow tests actually. Okay, let's start. First of all, my timer is broken. Okay. I'm the only person who stands between you and the after party. Sorry for that. I won't take a lot of time and try to be as concise as possible. Well, my name is Vladimir, and you already know about it, so let's skip it. I came from Moscow, this written in Bulgarian actually, not Russian. It's the same. Well, you can find me on GitHub and on Twitter. I have different handles, that's a problem. It's not so easy to remember that. I'm doing a lot of open source stuff. Check this out, maybe you can find something useful for you. I'm working for a company called Evil Martian, so we have this beautiful logo, and that's our legal name, with Evil Martians, so actually we are kind, most of us. And we're doing product development for big ones, small ones, and Europe, or Russia, United States, wherever. And that's not the interesting part. The interesting part is here, we're doing a lot of open source stuff, we're trying to popularize open source movement, kind of. And this particular talk is devoted to an open source project I'm working on since 2017, I think. Today is 19, yeah. Oh, well, and this project is related to testing. Oh, it's a little bit complicated talk for the last one in the day, so I'll try to make it as smooth as possible. Let's start with the story. And the first question, I hope I know the answer beforehand, but nevertheless, do you write tests? Oh, everyone here, at least once, try it. And it's cool. Writing tests is one of the key features of Ruby community. We recently told a lot about community and the Ruby language, so test is a part of it. And raise your hand if you think that your test could be faster and you suffer from slow tests. Woo! Cool. I hope you can come back home and try some techniques I'm going to talk about and make your tests a little bit at least faster. Now, the story. I'm working on a project called fountain.com. Doesn't matter what it's related to. And the story goes back to 2016, a year and a half ago. And when I joined the project, we had a phone situation, we got a lot of, actually not a lot of tests, and time spent for a build on CI servers was about half an hour to finish all the stuff. Running tests, linters, security checks, whatever. And that amount of time itself is not a good thing, right? And it becomes even more worse when you deal with CI services, because when you work in a team of, say, 10 developers and everyone is working on its own feature and pushing frequently, you've got a queue of builds, right? And you have to wait for other builds to finish before you're able to finally release the feature, and sometimes it takes hours, and you can push something in the evening, wake up in the morning, and your build is still in the queue. Wow, that's my cat actually. He asked me to put it on the spot. And one thing I want to mention that we didn't use any parallelization. We run everything sequentially, one container to run tests and everything else. And as we learned recently from one of the keynotes from the RailsConf, Rails 6 will be shipped with a solution, just parallel testing, speed up your test suite, don't care about anything, end of story. So that's how we can improve the speed of your test, probably. We tried this approach. We added some parallelization, five containers, and the time for running builds and tests decreased drastically, so we were able to continue working on the project, shipping new features. And what happened next? Well, we started to write more tests. That's obvious. We're writing more code, we need more tests. And the number of tests increased by 3 times. And if we wouldn't do anything without a test, we would end up with the same situation, half an hour for one build running in 5 containers. One may say is that, well, just increase the number of containers, right? Like, for example, Shopify too. But we're not Shopify, we don't want to spend so much money on testing infrastructure, and that's not a way out, so it's just a way to postpone the problem. So increasing resources is not a good option. We decided to find out why our tests are slow and to try to make them faster. And after some investigation and a little bit of work, we ended up with this. Kind of the same amount of containers and 3 times more tests. We decreased the time spent in testing. And if you do the math, try to do that, it's pretty simple. But if you don't want to, just believe me. We improved our test suite runtime by a factor of 4. It's not actually too much. I heard about much better improvements. But my story is like this. And the rest part of the talk I'd like to tell you how did we get here. So I'm gonna introduce a tool called TestProf. Okay. It's a little bit cut from the bottom. So what is a TestProf? TestProf is a collection of tools which allows you to diagnose and fix your slow tests. So it's literally contains of 2 parts, 2 groups of things. That's a TestProf map, a lot of stuff inside. So it's just a toolbox, it's not a one project, it's a collection of multiple techniques which I use to improve test suite runtime. So we have, on the one hand, we have profilers, so the tooling which allow us to identify bottlenecks. And on the other hand, we have, I call it recipes, some small code snippets which allows you to easily patch your tests and make them faster without completely refactoring. And let's start with some simple things. And I'd like to talk about some stories related to profilers. And the first group of profilers I call general profilers. That's profilers built on top of the existing solutions in the Ruby world. So we got RubyProf, and we got StackProf, and the new one, RSpec. Oh, there's one letter is... Oh, sorry. That's a typo. I can tell you about the general profilers. So they're designed to profile Ruby code. They do not take into account if you try to profile your tests. So they do not have this context. All we can do is to profile the execution of your Ruby code, and it doesn't matter if you're running tests, you're running your application code, or whatever. So we can find some general bottlenecks. For example, you can try to run TestProf with StackProf integration. Most of the TestProf profilers are activated through environment variables. Kind of. And if you try to run it on some particular tests, you can make some insights. For example, in this example, we have this third line telling you that you write into log in 7% of samples collected by StackProf. Yeah, StackProf is a sampling provider, so it collects stack traces and you can analyze them somehow. The reason is, we're writing to the log in our tests. Have you ever took into test log I don't think it's totally needed to write into log triangle during the test, right? So just disable this. If you're using Rails, for example, that is a pretty simple snippet. And you increase your test suite runtime by 6%. It's not that bad, right? Just having this simple configuration. And if you still want to use log, actually it could be useful if you want to debug some problems. There is a recipe from TestProf which activates as standard output logging during the test. So you can just activate it and see what's going on in your code base. It's very useful when you try to figure out active record queries, for example, why there are so many or so few, depending on your case. The good thing with stack samples is you can build this great and beautiful graphs called flame graphs. Well, I'm not going to explain what is it. It's worth its own talk. And I just want to mention that this particular profile shows me some interesting fact. We have these two rectangles related to database cleaner. Who used database cleaner? You use it to make RSpec or Minitest work with Capybara, right? Yeah. Then prepare. You don't need it. You don't need database cleaner, most likely. If you're using Rails 5.1 or greater, so 5.2 actually, no, Rails greater than 5.1, then you have everything out of the box. The problem with Capybara test is that active record, everyone uses active record with Rails, creates one connection per thread. And Capybara test spawning a separate thread to run on a server, which accepts your request. That's why you need a database cleaner. You can use transactional testing, right? And Rails 5.1, the problem has been fixed. But if you're using something less than Rails 5.1, Rails 4, Rails 5.0, you can just add this simple recipe from active record, from TestProf. I call it active record 1 left as a historical reason. Officially it's called a little bit different. And the same functionality will be available for your test suite. And it could increase your feature specs, runtime, by a factor of 2 maybe more, depends on the number of tests. And database cleaner is no more needed. Let's talk about another profiler, RubyProf. It works a little bit different. It's not a sampling profiler. It integrates into Ruby virtual machine and tracks all the method calls and time spent in each method. So it's a pretty heavy one. If you turn it on, it slows down all the execution, but you can figure out some different insights. In that case, as you can see, we spend 20% of time in our test doing encryption stuff, right? That's kind of quick read library in that case. And the reason for that was that in a super cool gem called Sorcery, fortunately it's not well maintained anymore, it's an alternative to device, it's an authentication library. They do not have this default setting for the encryption strength in test environments set to something smaller than 10. Which is the same as in production. And when we turned it off, the whole test runtime became twice faster. Because every time you create a user, you should create a password, so you made a call to create library, and you're trying to encrypt your password in the test environment as much strength as possible. You don't need it in your test, right? Hopefully, I proposed a patch to a library. Now, if you're using the recent version, you shouldn't expect such kind of problems, but you should check. So, that's the end of the part of the general profiling. Nothing interesting so far, except from the one thing. You should consider test environment different from other environments. In terms of some things like encryption, logging, whatever, everything which is not necessary in test and not effective business logic. Just disable it, and that could make your test much more faster. Well, that's pretty simple things. Maybe you try to do that with your test, or this with your app code. Let's go further and learn some special profilers. So what does it mean special? That's profilers are built specifically to profile tests, so they integrate into testing frameworks such as RSpec and Minitest, and allow you to get some interesting information. Well, I'd like to talk about two of them. One called is TestProf and another called is EventProf. TestProf is a thing that integrates only with RSpec. In RSpec we have tags. We can mark our example group with tags, and we actually can use later this information for something like, for example, creating these kind of records. If you use in Rails, in RSpec Rails, you automatically get this type tag, which defines what kind of test is it. So it's kind of controller test, model test, whatever. Using TestProf, you can analyze how many time you spend in each group of tests related to this tag. And why does it matter at all? Well, for example, if you want to optimize the specs, you should first figure out which of them are the slowest. Not just run an RSpec profile, but as a whole, as a group, because usually you share some common configuration and setup between these types of tests. And with TestProf, you just can take a look at the picture at all and decide, for example, so we get query specs, and they do not take a lot of time. Let's do not thinking about how to optimize them. Let's focus on controller and service specs, because they're the slowest. And TestProf goes with this, yeah, it works. Beautiful animation and some additional features. Just for those who don't want to read the console output and would like to play with beautiful charts. EventProf is a more interesting thing. It's kind of a combination of RSpec profile and well, let's say active sportification. Active sportification is a part of Rails, and it's a way, it's kind of instrumentation library. So it provides you some events you can subscribe to, and when something going on in your application, for example, every time you make a query, there's event SQL, active record is fired, you can subscribe and do something with this event. It contains information about the time it took to fire the query and so on. And EventProf provides you information of how much time do you spend doing this kind of thing in your tests. So for example, if you run EventProf with SQL active record, you can figure out which tests are most slow in terms of database query. So it's a signal to optimize them. Maybe they're doing something they shouldn't do. They're doing too lot of active record stuff. You can use it further with other events which Rails provides. And the good thing that it's not Rails specific and not RSpec specific. It works with Minitest, and actually it has an API, extensibility API, which allows you to integrate it with your custom instrumentation or your framework instrumentation. So it's totally Rails free. If someone else doing something without Rails, I don't know, maybe Hanami. TestProf also provides some special events which are missing in the original libraries. For example, it's a factory create event which tracks only top level factory calls, so you can analyze how many time you spend doing factory things. And an interesting event called Sidekick Online, which tracks the amount of time you spend executing Sidekick jobs in line. And let's stop here for a while and discuss this kind of Sidekick problem. Sidekick has different test modes, one of which is online, so it means that every job that is enqueued is performed right away. And the problem with this approach, and many people just enable it for their test suite and just do not care. Well, we did have the same setup, and we tried to profile it, and I found that, well, it was 5 minutes out of 20 we spent doing Sidekick jobs, and when I tried to disable it by turning fake mode on, we got a 20% time decrease. And just for disabling this one, again, line of code, actually a little bit more. And there's an article, a post, in our blog. I don't want to recall it here. You can check it out, where I explain how to migrate existing testing code base from inline mode to fake mode in 3 simple steps, and do not refactor your tests at all. So, special profilers allows you first of all to kind of localize problems. So you can figure out, okay, I have a problem with database, I have a problem with background jobs, whatever you're doing. And yes, testing inline is not a good idea. Speaking about database, if you're using factories, anyone using fixtures without factories here? Okay.
Sorry.
Okay, because the next part is devoted to factors. I'm not going to talk about factories versus fixtures here. Maybe the afterbody. But the thing here, we of course use factories, and well, it turned out that we spend about 80% of the time, total time, in factories, and we decreased this well, a lot, I think 3 times. And let me tell you about factory profiles. So we got a couple of them. The first one is called Factory Doctor, and the second one is Factory Prof. Factory Doctor is pretty simple. Everyone, I think most of you, not everyone, not exactly, have seen this kind of idea: do not use, create every time. In some tests, you do not need to create a record in the database, do not persistence. So use kind of build or build stuff. A lot of articles written about this. Okay, cool. So you got an existing code base, existing test. How do you check whether you need to use create or not? And actually, when I ask myself this question, I figure out that it's possible most of the times. And Factory Doctor is exactly the tool which trying to do that. When you run Factory Doctor, it tries to identify, do you need to persist the record in this test? Maybe you do not check anything related to database, and you can replace your create code with build stuff. And the tool is working actually. It even shows you how much time you waste creating records instead of building stubs. So you can try to run it against your models, and maybe there could be huge numbers, and that's a reason to refactor them. And to make this refactoring more magical and less difficult, there is a recipe called factorial stuff. Just add a tag to your example, and all create calls internally automatically translates into build stat calls, and you don't have to change your tests at all. That's kind of experimental stuff just for fun, actually. But I use it sometimes when working with legacy code bases. Coming back to factory create, so I already told you that, yeah, we spend a lot of time doing that. And the main problem why we spend a lot of time in factories, and the same problem I see in many projects, is a problem I call factory cascade. So, what is it? Let me try to explain it pretty quickly. Consider the following situation. We got 3 factories and situations, one use each other, and so on. So when you create one comment, for example, from this code, it creates 5 records. And that's a pretty simple situation. And that's the phenomenon of factory cascade. When you use associations within, and you describe everything, and you have a deep hierarchy tree, you can end up creating much more records than you expect. And you know, active records is slow, because every time you create a record, you run validations, callbacks, whatever. It's not a database problem, actually, it's active record problem. So it's better to avoid such situations. And first of all, you should identify it. And for that, I'd like to introduce another notion, and I call it factory stack. Well, it's just a chain of calls to factory during the one top-level call. So from the example here, the corresponding stack is like this. It consists of 6, why 6, I don't know, records. And as we already learned, if you have something like a stack or stack sample, we can build a flame graph. Of course, factory stacks are not called stacks, but why not? So I tried to do that, and it turned out to be a pretty useful tool, and I called Factory Flame. So Factory Flame, it's a really flame graph built on top of these factory stacks, and it shows you all the problems actually with your factories. So the what? Sorry. So just like a usual flame graph, the wider the column, the more times you go to this particular factory, and the taller, then the bigger your factory stack. And you can see the similar covers corresponds to similar factories, and we can find that we doing a lot of similar things within one call. That's an example from the project. So we're creating a lot of records which are likely not related to the record under test. The lower one. Let me tell you this short story about not so good factories. So we had a couple of tests, and 24 examples ran for about a minute. And it was a model specs, it's too much. I tried to profile this, and I found out that we're doing almost everything that specs are doing are generating data through factories. So I generated a factory flame record, and it turned out that we had something like this. So the height of this one is, I think, 13 records created per one call to this low-level record, and I decided to fix it. So how to fix factory cascades? The first option is the following. So it's simple, just do not declare associations in your factories, just remove them. And instead, provide them explicitly every time you call create or whatever. The problem with this approach is that, well, you're not using factories as expected. You have to always specify additional attributes. That's make writing tests less convenient, right? But that could be the case. Another option is sometimes possible, actually, especially when you're dealing with generalization. You can use, if you're using factory girl, this kind of syntaxes to infer associations from other ones. And that way, at least reduce the amount of records created accidentally. And there is one more fix, which again, a piece of magic. It's called create default. That's a part of TestProf. That's again a recipe. It's not a part of factory vault. How does it work? It creates an association, and every time the same factory is used within some other during the test run, it reuses already created record. So it's especially useful if you're working with hierarchical data and multi-tenant applications. You can create tenant 1, declare it as a default, and avoid declarations for every following call to factories. I built this not to use as a kind of everyday instrument, but to fix as a quick fix. So because all you have to do is just replace a couple of calls to create with create default, and you fix the factory cascade. Another type of profiling which provides factory growth except from flame graphs is just general information how many factories have been created during the test run. It's also useful, and in that particular example, you might notice that for every test we create the same couple of records each one for every test window is the same data, right? So that's exactly the case for fixtures. Why to recreate the same data every test if you can create it once and reuse, right? Well, why not? Why not using fixtures with factories altogether? And I don't like using Rails features because they are maintainable. And that's why I built any fixture. Well, it's much more flexible. Any fixture is just a kind of wrapper of any code you want to write. And all it does is tracks the database goals in order to clean up the database in the end of the test run. So it looks like this. So we just call in a magic method fixture. We use refinements. It's not necessary, of course. It's just for shorter syntax to not pollute the global namespace, right? We don't want mathematician. Right? We want to use it only in this particular file. Yeah. And all we can do is just call in fixture, register it with unique name, and do anything you want. Not specifically factory calls. You can build records manually, whatever. And when you go next time fixture, for example, account, it doesn't create a new record, it just reuse the same one from cache. And that's why you can create records once. That's simple fixtures, and you use it in every single spec. Yeah, there is also one more refinement for active record. It's called refined. Take a look at the documentation, what it is. It's just a syntax sugar. And the good thing here, and fixture also provides you some interesting information, how much time is saved using any fixture. And in our case, for example, we again improved our test suite runtime twice by extracting some core models into a fixture. And that was just using one shared context pretty fast. Well, I just published a new blog post, Evil Martian's website. You can check it out, where I explain more thoroughly these factory problems. So it's live. Check this out. And it's almost everything I'd like to tell you. Well, yeah, that's just some kind of conclusion for this part. And the last part is related to many other things which I haven't TestProf, but I don't have time to talk about today. No, oh, this one gets me. And crossing that road. And the title is not accident. Let me tell you about what other things do I have, what other profilers and recipes. Another good one, it's RSpec only, it's called RSpec Dissection. That profiler tries to figure out how many time you spend in let declarations and memorizations, and how many time you spend in in before callbacks. So actually, what is used for? You trying to figure out if you spend a lot of time doing before each, maybe it's a good idea to use before row, right? To generate or manipulate data once and reuse it in every example. The same goes with let. Let's replace it with something else and not recreate data. But RSpec built-in before callback is dangerous, right? Because, well, it can pollute your database, your anything, whatever. That's why I built my own before row with almost the same syntax, just without arguments. And it works a little bit different. It wraps the whole group execution to protection and rollbacks it in the end. So you shouldn't worry about database pollution and whatever. So you can just replace your before calls with before roll and reuse it. And the same recipe for let, and called let it be. It works pretty much the same. The data is generated once per group. You don't have to generate it for every example. So if you use, say, a banned version of let, you can easily replace it with let it be, and everything will be great. And one more thing, small thing. Of course, I'm a big fan of Ruby code. And it's a good tool not to maybe profile your test, but sometimes we can use it to refactor it. And I got this special code which bundled into TestProf and called RSpec aggregate failures. What it does, it breaks the principle of one expectation per example, right? Because in most cases it leads to, well, access test, you're doing a lot of stuff, you can check, you can use multiple expectations. And RSpec, since version, I think 3.3, goes with this magic tag called aggregate failures, which allows you to combine multiple expectations within one example and provide information about each one of them. And it's a good idea to combine one-liners, one expectation per example, specs into a bigger spec. Especially if you're dealing with, for example, request specs. That's a common situation, but in one spec you check for a status code, and another one you check for a body. You can combine them both. You don't need to separate tests for that, because, well, the context is the same. And, well, that's what I would like to say about Ruby code. It's the only code for so far, nothing else. And, well, we're pretty much done. The main thing that in most cases tests are slow for, well, 3 reasons. They are not configured properly, the code they test are not testable, so not easy to test. So it's not designed to be testable. You have to maybe generate a lot of data, it's high coupled or whatever. And the main factor here actually is you, because developers rarely care about tests. Why do we care about tests, right? We do care about our code, app code sometimes, not always. But who needs clean and well-designed tests? What's the reason for that? Actually, the reason, as one of the reasons, is the speed. And we should take care of it. Well, some links. Just released a new version of the TestProf, especially for this conference, and we got a brand new documentation site with a lot of guides. Check this out. Some future ideas. I started using GitHub projects. I'm using it. I give it a try, so I'm using it for TestProf. I added some notes on what I want to accomplish for this project. And the most interesting is the last one, is TestProf CI. And the integration with maybe CI services, maybe some kind of dashboard to not only profile and fix existing tests, but to prevent some kind of bad behavior. But that's a big project. Well, I think that's it. Take care of your tests, find them, grab some stickers. This one, thank you.